Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Web3 Building Blocks panel. Everyone's been introduced, and so in the interest of crypto speed, I think we should get right into it. So I'm going to take an unusual start, and I'm going to open the floor to the panelists, and whoever gets in first gets to pick any topic they like around Web3 building blocks and go for it. Your time starts now.
Data. It's all about data. Just kidding. Yeah, I didn't really want to start there. I don't know why I jumped in. I just felt pressured and thought I should. No, I actually, for those of you, how many people in the room do know about IPFS and Filecoin actually? Like probably, so pretty much everyone. And probably, I do wonder where you heard about it, if it was before like this whole NFT craze or if it's something that's happened since then. But the kind of goal of IPFS and subsequently Filecoin is to open up the whole web. So while we are like considered a Web3 building block, we're also, have practical use cases for, our current data models. So I think we all know that, currently we've kind of got a centralized data model, and what we're aiming to do is try and flip that a bit and create a more resilient stack and for Web3 as well as Web2. So, currently we've got challenges with centralization, like the attack vectors. If AWS goes down, our whole servers go down and we can't work anymore. And what we're trying to do is, spread that out and, make a more resilient data storage web, really. So, that's what we're doing here at IPFS and Filecoin, and a whole lot more as well. And we're obviously also involved in NFTs and the metaverse and creating the creator economy, because what IPFS does is addresses content by its content hash. So it makes a cryptographic hash of that, which means you can get it from anywhere, including Mars, like Steve said before. So it's a peer-to-peer system with a unique kind of content identifier rather than a location path. Hopefully I explained that okay.
Thanks for jumping in and going first, Ali.
Hey.
So I mean, IPFS is being used a lot in NFT metadata. Can you just say a couple of things on that as well?
So the reason that IPFS is, pretty much every guide you'll find on metadata, and even I just had a quick look at the immutable pages, and they also recommend using IPFS for their metadata. And that is because of that unique content addressing system. So instead of addressing something by, a HTTP location, which pretty much can change at any point, and there's been some famous literal rug pulls. Someone changed like NFT pictures into rugs at one point, and that's because the metadata was addressed by a location. And the point of an NFT is for it to be a unique, non-fungible thing. So if you're going to add metadata, the best way to do it is with IPFS, which has a unique content hash for that content. No matter where you get this content ID from, you're going to get the same content every time. So that is really why that's the building block of NFTs at the moment. So, yeah.
Thanks, Ali. All right, so guys, what are Web3 building blocks? What should they be? Let's define this.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in. So first thing, definitely DeFi. So that's the base layer actually. So one thing that we will definitely discuss about is kind of how Bitcoin kind of it's a store of value. But when DeFi came up and it basically took over, right? So right now when you want to exchange assets on chain, you basically do it through decentralized exchanges. Sometimes you kind of make swaps through stable swaps and stuff like that. So the main thing is what DeFi enables is that it allows individuals and also corporate bodies to exchange assets to and fro from different types of assets. It could be tokens. It could also be basically coins, etc. So that's what DeFi enables. Yeah, and I think it's an important building block on the blockchain because just to put it simply, there's nothing more important than money, right? So that's what DeFi is for.
Yeah. Kind of providing an internet of value, right? So
yeah,
that's one
right.
part of the system.
Thank you. How about Dan and Tin?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I mean Web3, it's like a meme. Come on, we're inventing the building blocks as we go. I think kind of like Web2 used to be a meme too, which is basically transitioning from a world where you only read, to start having user-generated content. And then the meme goes that Web 1 is just read, Web 2 is read-write, Web 3 is read, write, and own. I think if we're kind of trying to get technical about it, it's about having composability, permissionlessness, self-sovereignty, try to kind of like progress to forego of legacy financial institution, legacy nation states, all those things that are still like existing meme and we can't really rely on other things for the time being. Yeah, so I guess like DeFi being one, base layers being some parts, and then like all the middleware which enables the file systems, NFTs as like a building block for metaverse, and probably like we'll invent more memes. I guess DAOs. DAOs are super interesting because it's like breakthrough in how human coordination can produce productive output without so many lawyers and accountants. Sorry for like probably a lot of people in the room. But yeah, that's the gist, I guess. And Tim?
Yeah, well said. One of the reasons why I got into the space was I was in IT for 10 odd years in the early 2000s. And I love the internet. We all love the internet. It's changed our world. But for me, it started off as a much more decentralized and distributed place. And it was, I think someone said yesterday, it was a brand new frontier, and that's exciting. I feel like we've kind of almost reached like max capitalism on Web 2, and we've kind of conquered and found every little rabbit hole there is to find. So when I saw particularly Ethereum, I saw an opportunity to build the next generation of the internet using this emerging technology. So we're still early, and I heard people say that to me in 2016, and I said, what are you talking about? I can already use it. Smart contracts exist. And then I tried to build something, and I realized, oh, we're early. So yeah, look, for me, Web3 is about exactly like you said, Dan. It's about giving self-sovereignty back to people who participate and add value. It's about transparency. It's about accountability. And I think, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a completely different world. Not just an internet world, but a world. So I think it's essential. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. So what are the obvious blockers or challenges that we face moving forward in the Web3 industry? What are we missing? What are the things that you can see that you think we really need to work on?
I can take that. So obviously Block 8 builds early stage ventures. One of the challenges I've seen, particularly in enterprise, is trying to unwind what people have already built. Now they might serve their customers very efficiently, but it's very hard and very expensive and takes a lot of will to move what they've built into a Web3 context. So most of the innovation I'm seeing is coming from a startup. And you've just heard from Immutable, still a startup in many ways, very well funded and have built a lot of tech, which is super impressive. But you're more likely to see innovation coming from that side than you are from top down. So that's going to take time. And I've kind of compared the sort of innovation agenda of these enterprises as almost like IT services, sort of IT refresh cycles. You know, you're going to see 5 to 10 year horizons for this stuff to start to happen. And even when you do see it happen, you're seeing little sort of pieces, little process maps or little versions of their parts of their business being cordoned off, experimented with, and then if it works, they can scale it. But once again, you're not just trying to win the hearts and minds of one company, you're trying to win the hearts and minds of everybody that wants to do business, both up and down the stack with that company. So yeah, I think the biggest challenge is really convincing people that they want to go down this road. And I can guarantee you there were people in 1998 saying, why do I need email? You don't understand. I put this piece of paper in this machine, I press send, and it sends the paper to the other side. It's called a fax machine. And you would be just laughing out loud if you saw that back then with today's knowledge. And I think we're there today. And yes, we have a few killer apps that are arriving, and that's super cool. But it's definitely coming more from the retail sort of cool kids crowd. It's not necessarily coming from the big end of town. So for us to see the big innovation we all know that's coming, I think you're going to see most of it coming from bottom up.
Thank you. I mean, you know, don't hold your breath, but we might be back to using fax machines for consensus before too long.
Hope not.
All right. I want to direct this one to you, Dan. What's a controversial or... Oh, good point. Well, I mean, so we might have a consensus clash here, you know. Which one's going to go first?
Fork.
So to Daniel Barr, feel free to hand the baton to someone else on if you like, but knowing you won't. What's a controversial opinion that you hold, or an unusual or unconventional opinion?
Yeah, many. I mean, one of them is that the Great Firewall of China is really good, but that's not related to crypto, so we can talk about it another time. Other than that, I think, I guess like maximalism is one of the things that I think are quite problematic, and maybe also that a lot of times when we're thinking about crypto and Web3, the rise of it, so we're thinking about all kind of applications for enterprises, like Block 8 guys are building really well, or generally we're thinking about kind of developed countries and how we can get rich even quicker because we're already like wealthy enough, so we want to exceed it. But I think that when we're thinking about crypto for real, where it will succeed, it never is really from where people's lives is already too convenient. So you start seeing it from disadvantaged people, and sometimes the less likely place for it to succeed, so to speak, because there's less suits people or whatnot, ends up being where it's most relevant. So I don't know if it's really controversial, but I think it's like obvious when you're really looking on the ground that these are the people that it really matters to them, and that's kind of what ends up being successful.
How much of a relationship do you think there is between the technology that we build and, as you say, people who have less advantage getting involved and really driving interesting things?
Yeah, like now the barrier of entry is really high. As Boki always says, the learning curve is really steep, so brace yourself. I think that, yeah, we see it. We had the Blockathon just this weekend, and oftentimes people come with a lot of excitement and want to build stuff, and the technology is still like not there. And I think especially like we have people from India. I have sometimes writing to me from like not Bangalore and the tech hubs, like people from random places want to get involved, and it's just like not really there yet. But it's getting there, I think. And those are the people that, again, it really matters to them. So long as the narrative fits, they kind of magically surface and you see amazing things happening.
Now, when we were talking before the panel, you expressed some interesting ideas. Your point one, I think, was around love. Do you want me to ask the question directly?
Yeah, sure, yeah. So, yeah, recently, basically, I mean, about a year and something ago, I had an incident where there was an online mob. You know this thing when sometimes you wake up and some people start blaming you online for all kind of stuff, online mob. So I had this online mob coming after me for something, and I didn't realize what's happening. Then I found that there was a code repository that was forked about 100 and something times, and my name was on it, and someone probably used it for not the right reasons and blamed me for stuff. But then, like, as I realized, okay, what does it mean to be an open source creator? It's basically you're putting a piece of technology out there, and it's like codified knowledge that can then be utilized by anyone for good intention, for bad intention, and it still is there. So I think this is a digital manifestation of unconditional love, because basically the creators that are putting it out there, they're not expecting for anything in return. It's like a piece of knowledge that is then provided as a gift for humanity. And I think this is like a very important principle for crypto, because it's not just about this piece of software, it's how that entire economy around crypto and open systems is built. And yeah, that's the unconditional love part. I think it's like a higher cause than almost anything else. So that's a motivation for why crypto.
So if you think about the way that the world's going at the moment, whatever your opinion on that, and imagine what would you think that we should build now that we'd wish that we'd built in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, maybe Daniel or someone else, I can talk about other stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of what we have to build into the future, I think first things first, right? We want to make sure that we are always staying on the bleeding edge of building. So we want to make sure that we encourage our developers to kind of like always be pushing the boundaries. So some stuff like, for example, DeFi applications like Curve, Aave, you probably wouldn't have thought of that 5 years ago. And then similarly for NFTs, nobody expected NFTs to take off that way. We kind of thought about CryptoKitties in the past, right? And then it came back again, came back with a vengeance. Now you have like communities like Bored Apes, for example, high valuation, looking at different types of communities being built. So I think it's always about pushing the boundaries, not about where's the end state. So where we begin it's important, but always making sure that we are encouraging our developers as a community, making sure everybody is well serviced, being pushed out into the open, that's important. personally, I came from Deloitte Consulting doing blockchain actually. So one thing that's near and dear to my heart is to make sure that our enterprises are kind of like included into this again. So there was a fresh wave of enterprises actually in 2019 to 2020. But then they couldn't find a good use case actually, and then they actually fell out. So from the 2020 wave to 2022, if you guys notice, we didn't really get that many enterprises actually. So I think that's a wave waiting to happen. And I think the frontier is definitely going to be there. There's going to be a rotation of frontiers actually.
Yeah, I think we're beginning to see that as well. And I'm ex-IBM, so obviously Hyperledger and supply chain logistics, that's a big use case I think now. But also we're seeing Accenture and some of the other bigger players come on board and really see the use cases here, and not just in DeFi, but in logistics and in tracking, in ledgers, in accountability. So yeah, I think there's movement happening there. So 100%, you're right.
Yeah.
And I still, to the previous point, I still think there's a lot of infrastructure that we need to build out in this system. Like you said, we keep saying we're early, and what do we mean by that? Well, if we're putting our technical hats on, there's still a lot of interoperability problems, there's security problems. There's all of these kind of technical challenges but so many people are working on them, and it's just amazing. If you see a problem in this ecosystem, you're really like, well, let's jump in and fix that. And that goes to the open source, kind of mentality that we brought to it as well. So, yeah.
I would just add something to that. I wouldn't really think about what we wish we would have built today instead of in 5 years from a technical perspective. I would look at it from a community perspective. I think, look at this room, for instance. I mean, we've all been in this space for quite a while, and every year it's getting bigger and more impressive. I made the, observation yesterday that last year there weren't that many banks in the room. This year there is, and if you go back every year, there's a new audience. So I think building the community in the way that Steve and the team have is actually giving us a really solid foundation. Of course, we had Hume and Bragg here as well, right? So that will build the community to a point where we can get out of our own way and then build the tech and get on with it. Because I think a lot of the I keep saying this, but the hearts and minds are the hard part, right? Building the tech, that's just a matter of time and energy and money. And that will come. But I would be very disappointed if we just thought about the tech and then in 5 years go, God, I wish we got the hearts and minds on board. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, 100% agree with that as well. And I'm relatively new to this space. And one of the reasons I really fell in love with it was because it really is empowering people to have an opinion on how they want to do things and empowering them to move value or create their own economies for creators, particularly at the moment. And, in DeFi as well, we don't need this rethink how we're doing things. And, was this the right way? Do we need a new iteration here? Do we need to rethink it? And as an engineer, that's something that we should be doing all the time anyway. And as a member of society, that's also something that we always want to be doing and, getting better at, not bifurcating our people, but, trying to give a voice to everyone and come up with something that you kind of is fair and for everyone. That's, that kind of collaboration and that bringing together of so many different aspects, even just on this panel or in this room, that's, one of the great things about this Web3 movement or this iteration of the web.
So one of the things I think about a lot in regards to crypto is the framing effect, or how what we do frames what's possible to follow. And so in the context of governance, for example, a really common thing to do is to make some smart contracts and put them online and call that an organization. But of course, what then happens is that participation and a culture emerges, and the real organization is a product of that starting point. So if we consider governance in the context of a DAO, for example, how much of the DAO should be organizational design? How much of it should be technology? How much of it should be people? What are we missing at the moment to shepherd this new kind of organization into a viable state? Is that a building block or not?
That's a massive question.
I know, right?
That's a question for you, Dan.
Yeah, I guess DAO is it a Telegram group, a DAO? No, I mean, the meme used to go that a DAO is basically a Reddit group with a shared budget. Before DAOs were we started realizing how to build them and stuff. And then I think what started probably in 2018-19 experiments, Aragon, DAO Stack, everyone tried to build end-to-end solutions, which is the fanciest thing that has comprehensive like voting on chain for everything, which then resulted in like pretty poor engineering because gas fees were out of hand and because there's governance fatigue. And then we kind of defaulted back to the most primitive, like kind of compartmentalize the primitives of governance, which is multi-sig. So then people went to use the Gnosis Safe and some other multi-sigs. And then voting, which actually majority of the people are using off-chain voting with Snapshot these days, which is, again, like hosted on AWS or something else, probably soon on other decentralized network.
Should definitely come and talk to us if you're doing that.
Yeah.
I think Snapshot might use IPFS as well in there somewhere.
Maybe starting with the Mosaic, or what's it called, Zodiac. But yeah, I think that back to your question of people or technology or product, I think it's there's a lot to do about culture configuration. So one thing is to provide awesome product, but then if you don't have the culture for people to actually participate in a meaningful, impactful way, and then there's sometimes like the memes frame the wrong narratives. There's this concept of like trustless or leaderless about DAOs. I actually realized recently it's not leaderless at all. It's the other way around. It's leaderful. Everyone needs to be a leader in a DAO, because if you are unable to have leadership skills in a DAO, then basically you're parroting someone else's leadership kind of propaganda, or generally the DAO would just kind of like get into fatigue, because not everyone is there to like vote every second. So it needs to be, it needs to kind of have much more empowering, giving people agency approach. And yeah, that's like my meme for DAOs. It's a leaderful rather than leaderless organization.
I like that.
Yeah. And
I would also just add, it's all about stage for me. I mean, a DAO is a great place, particularly once it starts working well. But in the early stage of any protocol or company or project, you need to move fast and break things, and you can't make every decision by committee. So sometimes you need to take on some tech debt or some vision debt and get to a place where, you know, it's self-sustaining, either from a capital perspective or product perspective, and then you can transition to a DAO. I think a lot of projects with the best intentions have started DAO first, and that can be very difficult, especially remotely and across the internet and different time zones. So I think it's a destination eventually, but at the moment we're still figuring it out, and you don't want to die on the way through trying to implement a governance framework that ultimately is going to not serve the project at the speed you need to move at. So yeah, I can't think of a project that I super like that's really kind of solved it. I think Synthetics has done a pretty good job. I think they transitioned decently. I don't know what you guys think or not, but for me, it's still unsolved.
Yeah.
I think there are certainly people in the community that would have differing opinions on how Synthetics did their governance, but they were a leader, and we can learn a lot from them. Sorry, Ali, you were
No, absolutely. I don't even remember what I was going to say, to be honest. So it must have been really important.
Actually, just on that, there is really interesting, like in Ethereum, a lot of the DAOs, people generally think that Ethereum is everything, and Ethereum is great, but in Ethereum, a lot of the DAOs are really rudimentary and primitives. What we see is that, like I really like the governance framework in Substrate ecosystem. You have basically councils, which each of them is functioning for different purposes. Some of them are able to then, just like what you're describing, interject and move fast when there's something urgent to solve, right? Like real world, rather than like just vibing in a Discord. So you see that there is mature experiments that are just slightly less in the spotlight of what's getting the most media attention and stuff. But it's actually maturing quite fast.
So is it like a dial that you can sort of move based on the speed and the decision making? Like, is that a consensus based?
Yeah, so
dial?
I mean, for the one specifically that I'm talking about, they have councils that each of them has different speed to settle, right? Or like if they need to interject on protocol upgrades or stuff, they can do it quite fast.
Cool.
Like there's exploits or whatever.
Now we're running seconds away from time. My next question was going to open the can of worms that is pseudonymous identity, but I think instead I'm going to ask you each to say 10 words or less on that subject, starting with Tim. Go.
I think that trusted identity and trusted payments are the key to move fast.
I'm kidding.
I really thought about that. Yeah, look, you know, my company, Block 8, we do startups and enterprise projects. I'd love to see that become one space, not two, sort of little silos of projects. But yeah, for me, the key to bring that together is to have the real world trust that their assets are secure and you know, KYC, AML, and they can move money around that actually is secure. And then on the crypto audience, they want to, in some ways, legitimise and show that they're a part of the global economy, and they want to plug into what's been built today. So call it a hybrid if you like, but I think there's definitely an opportunity to build more and more rails between the two, and you might have them ultimately become one network.
That was a great answer, and I think we might need to call it now. Does anyone want to sneak a few words in?
Yeah, I'll ask a question rather than a final statement. So I think generally crypto is borderless, jurisdictionless, and all this, as we mentioned before, nation state, jurisdictions, financial institution, it's a legacy thing for those that actually get it. But having said that, we are here in Australia, and Oceania, more broadly speaking, New Zealand is a good place too. And what I want to ask is, as entrepreneurs or creators of this space, because like everyone that's here is probably like doing epic, interesting stuff. So what do you think, or like have a think on what's the unique perspective and strength of Australia and New Zealand in entrepreneurial context, and how do we actually like make an impact? I have my answers, but I'm sure that you guys have yours. So just what is the unique perspective for Australia and New Zealand?
Good question.
Thank you. I want you all to think about that. That's your homework. And then write to Dan and let him know. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having us on the panel today. Hope that was enjoyable. And thanks to our panelists.
I know I'm lurking on the side. Tim, by the way, Tim, I didn't mention you before, Tim. You know, I love you, Tim. You've done a lot for this ecosystem, and you were forgotten simply because there were so many people on the panel. The next conversation again is also an important one. You know, the reality. Oh, hold on, people. The next panel is an important one for us because we're talking about trends in crypto markets, and it's funny the scale of this conversation relative to where it was 12 months ago, 24 and 36 months ago. You know, we're talking to people who are aspiring to do things as opposed to now the ecosystem and the way it's sort of taken off. So an important conversation, and Hannah Glass will be moderating the conversation, and she's another person who's contributing her time really generously in relation to this, and quite a number of issues that impact that industry. If at home you're hearing some chatter in the background, that's because that's humans talking, and my lord, you let them congregate. I didn't realise how much they would talk. So we're not at a pub having any drinks here. It's just people are embracing the opportunity to talk. So if there's any background noise in this stream, that's what it is. It's people talking. Please forgive them. They've been stuck indoors for the last 2 or 3 years. I'll get Hannah to come on stage and introduce all the panellists.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. We don't have a wonderful banner here, but today we are talking all about crypto trends. Now, it's pretty clear that this is an industry that has grown exponentially. It's also pretty clear there are a lot of newcomers into the market, and they're not all people who have spent their lives in front of computers. But it also means that as the people who are coming into this are expanding, whether they be retail, whether they be investors, whether they even be some of the biggest institutions in the world, we've got to actually work out what does this mean for the industry. And so today we have an incredible panel here to talk about what these trends are and what it might mean. And panel is Janine Granger, the CEO from Easy Crypto, Jeff Yu, CEO from Monochrome, Nathan Halliday, Country Manager at ZipMex, and Jonathan Miller, Managing Director of Kraken. My name's Hannah Glass. I am a Senior Associate at King & Wood Mallesons. For my sins, I'm a lawyer. But nothing that we say here will be legal advice. It won't be financial advice. This is about educating people and engaging in the conversation. So let's get to it. There's been a lot of movement in the market recently. And Jonathan, you've seen a lot in this space. How does it compare, and what we're going through now, compared to, say, what happened in 2017, 2018?
Great question. Thanks for having me, everyone. And yeah, I'm the MD for Kraken in Australia. I think that the main difference would be quantum. So, you know, the relative market capitalisation and so therefore amount of capital in the market and, you know, the types of players in the market. That's one layer. I think the other layer is that the diversity of the types of markets that we're seeing. So when you're talking about the market now, you're not just talking about a kind of speculative layer one marketplace. You're talking about the market for locked up, you know, total value locked up in DeFi, for example. Or you're talking about the total volume of transactions and floor price of NFTs, as well as the exchange, the marketplace for exchange of layer ones, layer twos, governance tokens. You know, the arena has exploded in terms of, well, there are multiple arenas now. And so then the interplay between those is different. And I think that what we've seen this last year has been both explosive growth and then, you know, volatility across multiple different dimensions. And some of that volatility is a function of growth itself. And some of that volatility is a function of the kinds of entrants that have come in. And I'm sure Jeff can talk more about institutional adoption, but we've seen institutional adoption. It's something that I've spoken about a lot during the year. You know, and that character, the behaviours that those kinds of participants have brought to the market have driven, I think, you know, and kind of in some interesting ways, a lot of the volatility in the trends that we've seen over the last, you know, 3 or 4 months at least. So yeah, I mean, that's my perspective for now. I'll stop talking.
Sure thing. Well, why don't we go to you, Jeff, and discuss what does it mean with institutional investors coming into space? Who are they? Where are they coming from? Where are they putting their capital?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because to many people, a lot of people, especially from the crypto space, and institutional insto could in many things. But so in Monochrome, we deal mostly with what we call the fiduciary market. So it advises people that manages other people's money that wants some kind of exposure through a regulated pathways. And truth to be told, that sort of pathway is very limited at the moment. It's only opened up very recently with ASIC's very helpful report 705 late last year. That's been massively, you know, in terms of product clarity for potential future product issuers like us, Monochrome. So, you know, specifically, we deal with a lot of clients that have an advisor. And the advisors industry, unfortunately, right now, very much tongue-tied to advice surrounding crypto assets. Also, problems with professional indemnity cover. The PI exclusions for crypto assets has came on board by underwriters over the past 12 months. Has been an issue, further added issue for them to even talk about it. So I think with the help of the industry, with the help of other industry participants, and also working with our ministers and regulators alike, we would love to sort of make it more accessible. I think the more participants, the more regulated access pathways to safer hands definitely helps this space to grow. Yeah.
We may come back to regulation in a moment because, of course, there are a few announcements yesterday and want to talk about where that is. But before we get there, Janine, a lot of the people who are your clients are ultimately retail. So where are you seeing that side of the market?
So we've seen a lot of changes in the retail end, and you know, as Jonathan was talking, the market's had a lot of diversification in terms of the products, the marketplaces, but also in terms of the customer base. So at the retail end of the market, since 2017, you know, when we first started, Easy Crypto started in 2017, and the trope of the crypto bro then was definitely alive and well, whereas now we're seeing a much greater diversity. So our customer base, we've got more than 35% of our customers are women. Interestingly, at the younger end of the market, that's where we see the biggest skew in sort of gender skew, but as our customers get older, they're almost 50-50 male and female, and the older demographics, the sort of baby boomers, 50s and up, are actually our fastest growing market base.
Fascinating. Now, Nathan, I see you nodding along enthusiastic. Are these the same trends you're seeing?
Yeah, very similar to what we're seeing, particularly across Asia. Seeing a lot of females coming into the space in those slightly older demographics than what we originally suspected. Definitely seeing a lot of uptake, more diversification in the types of assets people are holding. I mean, particularly, I guess, in this current market, we still see Bitcoin and Ethereum as being the top two. Right? That takes up 60-70%. But we do see people looking at GameFi, for instance, at Metaverse. We saw that big run late last year. And there's a lot of interest, particularly in Asia, I guess, where we've got a lot more of a younger gaming culture at times, really embracing that. Things like Gods Unchained, we heard from Immutable X, had a lot of success and interest, and then things like guilds as well. So actually, CGU is a gaming guild based in Australia that we worked with to launch into Asia. And I think some of those products in these different markets, people can sort of relate to and understand. And I guess looking at emerging markets and where we're going, blockchain really has the opportunity to disrupt just about every market. And for investors, whilst they're still sticking to those core, what you call more secure assets in a very volatile space, there is opportunities there, and people are looking at what's next and looking at how they can participate in those.
So in terms of, obviously we're now varying into what's happening overseas, do you think there's a different market or there are different trends driving the market in, say, Asia or Australia?
Obviously, the market is consistent in terms of price action. Obviously, that runs across global. But yeah, we do see different take-up rates. For instance, Singapore is a region that has significantly more value held in Ethereum than in Bitcoin, which is distinct. That's not normally the case in lots of different regions. As I said, things like guild and gaming, where there's thousands of people across the Philippines, or hundreds of thousands of people across the Philippines, playing Axie Infinity, earning those assets every day, and then guilds being set up to fund and empower those people to effectively create a living playing video games, which is, I wish that was around when I was about 12, but anyway.
Don't we all?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing some different take-up rates based on what, I guess, resonates with people, whereas in, I guess, other areas where the high net wealth, we're seeing much more people looking at USDC, USDT, looking at how they can maximise yields through DeFi or through products that we have as well. So it's one of the things I really love about the space. The opportunities are there and incredibly diverse, and it's up to you to work out what is right for you based on what you see coming and your own risk portfolio.
Yeah. Jeff, is that what you're seeing? Because I know you've been looking actively at particularly what's going on in, say, Canada.
Yeah, so we have published this whole series about the story of Bitcoin ETFs in other parts of the world. US, Canada, I think Europe is dropping this week. The article, I mean. So that's what we've been observing, is that the institutional sort of adoption comes very closely or into correlation about these kind of products coming out. When these kind of products, meaning exchange traded notes, exchange traded products, and we definitely hope to see that evolve in Australia more robustly. And for what Nathan's saying, that he's more attuned to the retail crowd, but we are more attuned to the insto crowd. The problem right now is that like I said, access pathways needs to expand more. And what we hope to see is hopefully a Bitcoin ETF in Australia, hopefully this year or maybe sooner.
No announcement today?
Unfortunately, no.
You've still got a bit of a way to go. But Jonathan, I mean, obviously Kraken is an international exchange as well. Are you seeing that there's that convergence going on, or do you think, we're going to be seeing kind of differences emerge more so, and particularly as we've now got some very significant exchanges emerging in the Australian market?
Yeah, it's really interesting, this idea of geography in crypto. It's I think it's been extremely relevant for a long time, and when we first started out in 2013, the business that I ran here in Australia that was then subsequently acquired by Kraken, its business model was to plug a liquidity gap. The geography of traditional money, was constrained, and it was constrained for lots of reasons, including kind of banking constraints. And so, liquidity existed, even though we're talking about a, stateless internet money or internet asset. Your access to that asset was still constrained by the geography. I think that's changed over time significantly, and that's due to multinational marketplaces having more access on-ramps and off-ramps, and I think on-ramps and off-ramps are still a really big part of what is infrastructure that the ecosystem needs, especially as it grows and becomes more mainstream. And that's the way that I think about Kraken's business is as an infrastructure business, and I think the morphology is kind of interesting, both from a geographic sense, it's in multiple markets, but also in terms of the way that it serves the market. It has a homogenous product to a certain extent, but that is slowly being, I guess that the ability to deliver a homogenous product is being constrained a little bit by regulation, I would say, and that's true for all exchanges into different markets. That's one dimension. Another dimension is that what it means to have crypto infrastructure is changing over time as well. So, only 2 years ago we saw the emergence of what we now call, decentralized finance, and there's so many amazing projects that were birthed in 2017 that have then, I think, changed the geography once more, but the geography of the crypto landscape, not of the physical world. And Kraken's kind of got an interest in that transformation, a significant interest in proof of work and proof of stake networks. And they acquired Stake, which is a big non-custodial staking provider, and infrastructure like a below the waterline tentacle, so to speak. So I think that the geography of the market now is certainly still constrained by geopolitical events, constrained by the Great Firewall. Mining being, in a sense, the location of mining and decentralized, and the distributed nature of mining being challenged by geopolitical events, and so I think we do see differentials, but it's not necessarily at a kind of behavioural level. It's more at a structural level.
So, in that sense, would you say that the changes that are happening to underlying infrastructure are ultimately impacting the market as a whole?
I think they're definitely part of the story of what crypto is right now, and whether that's exogenous kind of forces on the market, be it regulatory or geopolitical, or they're kind of endogenous forces, which are innovation and deployment of new ideas and kind of greenfield, eruptions of completely new ways of using the technology. Absolutely.
So, Janine, you mentioned one of the problems here is there are a lot of misconceptions that are still in existence around this area. What are they? What are the biggest misconceptions? And what can we do to actually try and work through these?
So when I do media interviews, the two most common things that I get asked around the negative perceptions of crypto around, well, it's just used for criminals and it's killing the environment. And I think we have a lot of work to go. We've talked a lot about this being a mainstream moment, but if you talk to people out in the street, there's still these massive misconceptions. And so it's a big job for us all to be out there educating people and trying to, change those stereotypes and those misled beliefs. And one of the ways that I like to talk about this is, get people to think about their first ever mobile phone. And when you look at that versus a smartphone today, they're just screeds apart. And so cryptocurrency, blockchain, it's a story about innovation, right? It's a story about constantly improving things, of making things better, of this move to proof of stake as opposed to, everything being on proof of work. And also it's a story about transparency and innovation in things like blockchain analytics, which, we've heard from some great companies on that at this event. And it's like there is, once people get their heads around how innovative and how transparent the industry is, those perceptions will, look as bad as comparing an old Nokia to a smartphone and going, well, this thing's never going to take off. And the transparency one, I think, is a real key part of that, because transparency is what drives the innovation. So the ability to see how much energy a particular transaction is using, that is not something that you have in other industries. You don't have that transparency. So that transparency can drive improvements both in the underlying technology, but also in choices around renewables. And, the industry is doing that itself. It's doing a lot more effectively than, say, if the EU tried to legislate it. But, we are making that change, and we also need to communicate that change.
So if we're talking about this, and you mentioned the concept of mainstream moment, which is obviously the whole theme of yesterday, do you think we're there?
I would say no, not yet. But that being said, it's tipping so quickly. So we did a survey recently and found that 20% almost of adults in New Zealand have cryptocurrency. That's on par with housing. And anyone who knows New Zealand, housing is the investment choice of the entire country. So it's like, this is where we're at. So it's like, that's 1 in 5 people when you're walking down a street that have already dipped their toes in. So that feels to me like mainstream isn't far away. However, mainstream is still a couple of years. When people are talking about getting started in cryptocurrency, they're thinking about it as a speculative investment tool. And the real value, the true opportunities that are available through DeFi, through different products, through the services, and that is coming out on top of blockchain technology, that's still a very long way away from public consciousness and mainstreaming.
So just going to DeFi and opening up to the panel, obviously we've kind of come through this DeFi summer. Where are we going to now? Because the value's not quite where it was, the yields aren't what they were either. Does this mean we're kind of in a bit of a trough of despair and perhaps we'll come back out of it? Or is it actually, well, maybe we need to go back to the drawing board?
I might jump in if you like. I think
Sure.
obviously interest rate rises with the Fed have definitely had impacts on all markets. The horrific stuff that's going on in Ukraine has definitely spooked lots of market as well. So certainly for our yields and across what we've seen, they have dropped. They go up and down based on what we see with market performance, which is similar to what you've seen in variable loans in traditional finance for a long period of time. Definitely there is still value in DeFi where things are being staked and locked up to help build projects. There's obviously risk with that as well. I think probably some people have run into the Ohm and the Time, Wonderland, these sort of things with 80,000% APYs. And you kind of look at those and go, how sustainable is that? So people will still keep building these projects. You have to look at what's underlying it, who's behind them. But in terms of effectively using crypto, DeFi to bridge some of the traditional finance things, I think there's still a long way to go there. I don't know off the top of my head what the total lending market globally is, but you look at what that value is, the amount of middlemen, market makers, commissions, agents, all of that. Blockchain technology has the ability to fully disrupt that, make it significantly more efficient, and that ultimately is where I think DeFi has a place to play. And I still think we're very early in seeing that when it starts to disrupt those markets. I think you asked about the mainstream moment. I think we're definitely seeing at the moment mainstream acceptance in terms of, yes, this has value, yes, this is important, and yes, it can do things. For me, the mainstream moment is when you're using your normal products and services you would, they're being underpinned by blockchain and you don't even know it. That's what mainstream looks like for me. I know the Immutable guys talk about that with gaming. We're not, there's a lot of pushback in the gaming community of people just using NFTs as a cash grab. And it's like, well, we want to empower these games through NFTs. We don't want you to even know it's an NFT. It's just a game for you. It's the same as it always would be. And I think this space can do that, and DeFi is no different to me in terms of where that could go over the next sort of 5-10 years.
So we're just going to see DeFi become the crypto mullet?
I think that's a good way to put it. I've read that article. It's quite a good one. The user interfaces, for people new into the space, setting up a MetaMask, transferring funds into an exchange, moving it into your MetaMask, putting that into a DeFi pool, looking at how you keep that secure, or all the concerns around how many steps are in that. When that user experience becomes really simple and seamless, and you're not worrying about any of that, you're just simply putting your funds in like you would with your normal bank account or any of those sort of apps, and it's all being managed through that, but you still understand the security of it and what you're doing with your funds. That's where I think we get to a mainstream moment, and I think that's what everyone's looking to build towards.
So, Jeff, we can come back to you for a moment because we're obviously now going into the world of DeFi, but so much of what you do is really in that more traditional world. How is that going to fit in with this as people are innovating on that underlying blockchain? Because ultimately an ETF is really a very traditional product.
Yeah, it is a traditional product, but with this kind of structure-wise, it's very different because traditional ETF doesn't hold an asset that if you lose the private keys, that's it. So custody is a very, very big expertise that is I would say, new to a lot of traditional issuers. So that's why we come in. We bring in an expertise of this world and merge it with their world. But back to the mainstream moment and how sort of all DeFi will fit in is that, well, the bigger picture that traditional portfolio allocators, financial advisors, etc., they are worrying about is, well, we have all enjoyed 30 years of sort of declining interest rates, and as a result, we have this rising tide lifts our boat. Like we all enjoyed, housing price goes up, well, our equity portfolio doing pretty well over the past decade or so. But what comes next is something that worries them a bit. So they're looking for alternatives in assets, particularly in digital assets, to see how we can build in a solution that dampens the effects of sort of market sort of downturn. Reason why Bitcoin is because specifically Bitcoin is not intrinsically valued. There is no, I would say, significant DeFi or any profit generating activities within Bitcoin, or no, it's backed by any asset externally. Or this gives it a very interesting proposition where you have a non-intrinsically valued asset, it also means that it may be more immune to central bank effects when it comes to interest rates and this kind of stuff. So first problem is definitely education. Like you mentioned, education is a very big part of changing people's perception and understanding about the reality of the space. And that's something that we invest a lot of time with as well. We do a lot of research around these matters. Particularly ESG is a big topic for advisors. The second thing is access. So like you mentioned, ETF. Most people in this room, probably maybe half of us, wouldn't buy in a Bitcoin ETF. But there are people out on the streets. It's built for people that are not currently able to participate or don't want to deal with, setting up a MetaMask wallet and these kind of things. I would say that when that happens, we can really, shed a bit of a tear and call it a mainstream moment achieved. Yeah, and I hope that is soon.
I think there are a few people who hope that's soon. So, obviously we've kind of spoke quite a bit about Bitcoin. ETH is the other main asset, and I think there have been several sessions today where you might have almost said that today is actually a day about ETH and Ethereum. The value is still significantly lower from Bitcoin. Jonathan, where do you see the value of Bitcoin and Ether going?
You asked me a prediction question. I'm going to have to evade it. I think that more fundamentally, the question we should be asking is, to what extent do crypto technologies, be they Bitcoin or Ethereum, replace traditional technologies in the use cases that they're being, applied to? And we've seen, that use cases are being applied to more and more arenas, as I mentioned earlier. So, that fundamental question: does a decentralized lending market perform better than a centralized one? Does a decentralized payments network? And I think it's still important to talk about payments networks, because moving value is really what we're talking about fundamentally with crypto. So, right now, if you wanted to build a business, a cross-border business, or any business that moves value, and you want to use traditional banking, you're relying on a couple of major multinational banks and this includes, whiz-bang startups like Wise. They're completely reliant on, and Revolut, and all these challenger financial services apps. They're just completely Revolut on the underlying infrastructure. The underlying infrastructure is a function of Swift. So, and essentially nostro-vostro accounting between banks, and then balance sheets that major banks have. So, to what extent does Bitcoin as an alternative settlement layer, and Ethereum's platform and other cryptocurrency platforms, networks, provide a better version of that infrastructure? You'd have to think that the answer is that they will, and that we will see a massive shift away from traditional infrastructure, especially given the geopolitical kind of hazard that's been presented most recently, where you can see censorship. Censorship, levied on individuals and on countries, and irrespective of the justness of the underlying issue at hand. And I think it's important to remember that there's a very unjust thing that's happening. There's a lot of collateral damage for everyone involved here when you have censorship. So financial censorship is a really interesting question. It's been brought into kind of it's been in stark relief, with events globally last year, this year, even in Australia. And so I think that you have to think that censorship-resistant, decentralised financial infrastructure is the future.
It's an interesting point that you raised, but we've gotten on a completely different area.
That was a great way to not answer a future price prediction question.
Well, I'm gonna, you value that.
I think sort of the main takeaway that I usually tell people when that question's being asked, that look, Bitcoin and Ethereum, they're both very different assets. Like, they do very different things, and they have very different value propositions. So my little wish for the world is that when we compare Bitcoin and Ethereum, it's like we compare fixed income and equities. Like, both are great at what they do, but they're different. And that's very important. Know the difference, and you don't make any mistakes, hopefully.
And while we're talking trends in crypto, one fun fact that I'll add on is that for just recently, over the last month or so, Ethereum has topped Bitcoin as our biggest seller in terms of total volume through our platform, which is first time in 4 years. So they are both very popular, but ETH is definitely gaining the upper hand.
Well, I'm getting the sign to wrap up here. Thank you so much. It's been a fascinating discussion. Clearly, there is a lot of stuff that's going on in this market. It's being driven by DeFi, it's being driven by the mainstream, it's being driven by instos, retail, and it's got a long way to go. Thanks so much.
Thank you.